Welcome to Revitalize Portland Coalition's Revive and Thrive podcast. I'm your host, Michael Hironimus, board member here at RPC. In this episode, we'll have Sam Adams, candidate for Multnomah County Commission District 2, and also former Portland City Mayor. In this episode, we'll be talking about a variety of topics, including crime and safety, homelessness, taxes and services, and the general economy. We have a great conversation on tap, so let's get to it. Sam, thanks so much for being on Revitalize Portland Coalition's Revive and Thrive podcast. It was great to have you on. You were one of the first government officials to reach out to RPC when we started about 2.5 years ago in 2022. That was during your time with Mayor Ted Wheeler. You were interviewed in our very first newsletter, so congratulations.
It's an honor. It's an honor.
And our fellow RPC board member, Evan Bernstein, had interviewed you, and you had said, hey, this is, and this was during a really kind of bleak time during Portland. COVID was still occurring, and there was some, social unrest during the city. And you provided a little glimmer of optimism, just saying that this was kind of your fourth revitalized Portland, if you will. And you've been here, done that before. So you've had a wide range of political offices that you've held, and now you're running for Multnomah County Commissioner. Can you tell us why this position and why now?
Yeah, thanks. And Mike, thanks for having me on the program. I really appreciate it. And yes, I'm a big fan of this organization and what you all are doing, and the importance of it can't be overstated. So the fourth time back at City Hall, I had a chance to see up close and personal, again, the workings of Multnomah County, and also the workings between Multnomah County and the city of Portland and other cities within the county. And what I saw, I found to be alarming. That sort of tie that is absolutely critical for the success of our local communities, plural, it was weak, and it was full of static, and it wasn't nearly productive as it had been in past times. So I found it, really alarming. From the outside, I think people sort of, and understandably so, sort of focused on maybe what seemed like personality differences, and they existed between the mayor and the county chair at the time, Deborah Kafori, but it really was a policy and philosophical difference. And one that I think had the county out of step with some of the critical mission points that it's responsible, and that it shares with cities, the other cities in the county. And that's, there are two kind of wheels. One is the human health and well-being sort of shared circle of responsibility, and the other is community safety. The county was very much focused, not completely, but very much focused on a housing first model for homelessness. But as we uncovered in the mayor's office doing our own work, we found that the waiting list to get into permanent housing was 5 to 10 years. And although the county had expanded some of its shelter capacity, it was nowhere near what was needed. And that it was offering folks experiencing houselessness sort of indoor congregate shelter, which is just a fancy word for lots of cots in big rooms. And people didn't want to go to it. And I understand why they didn't want to go to them. And on the community safety side, growing, spiking gun violence, property crimes, and person-to-person crimes, with the DA's office asking for more resources, with the jail not fully opened, 2 wings of it closed, depending on how you count it, up to 40% closed. And they weren't getting the kind of financial response to their budget request to provide a higher level of service that was needed to a higher demand for services on the public safety side. So I was alarmed, and it's the basis of why I'm running for Multnomah County Commissioner. Too often, full of dedicated leaders, full of great staff, full of excellent partners that just too often fails to deliver, and fails to deliver especially for those that are the most vulnerable in our community. And at the top, its decision making lacks focus, It lacks urgency. It lacks good partnership, and it lacks accountability. So I'm running to help change that. It's about changing the votes on the Multnomah County Commission, but also electing a mix of people, some of us that have experience taking on big bureaucratic problems in the past, and bringing people together and getting results. So that's sort of the background of what I saw firsthand. I was alarmed, and why I'm focused on the county with this candidacy and what I can bring to the table.
And I think you've been consistent in your vocalization of the county's policy directions and the choices that they've been making. The county chair holds a lot of power, especially as leader of both the executive and legislative branches of the county. You studied it. Does the chair have too much power? And if so, do you see any hope for reform here?
The Multnomah County chair, statutorily, as you mentioned, is a very powerful position. This particular chair, again, my criticism today is not personal. This particular chair has grabbed even more. And that kind of virtual one-person rule is never good, for the good, effective functioning of an organization of any kind, much less a $4 billion, 4,600 persons, local government that has a focus on critical needs in the community. One-person rule is just never works out well. It's particularly not working out well right now. And reform can come with a vote of 3 that want to move things in a different direction. I also think that the chair needs to treat the 4 members of the board, the 4 commissioners of the board, and get policy issues in front of them at the beginning so they can get input on the kind of research they're looking for, the kind of outcomes they want to see, best practices or promising practices around, and then come back to them with their, with the chair and her team or his team's sort of best recommendation, and have an early discussion not only with the board but with the community. If the chair is going to prevent commissioners from putting things on the board agenda, that is where oversight and policymaking happens. That's the only place it happens in terms of actual decision making, or should happen. We don't want to go back to, Tammany Hall days where decisions are made sort of in dark, smoke-filled rooms. These are tough issues, and it needs to have as many smart people on the board and in county government and in the community involved in figuring what the question is and what are the answers. And so I really implore this chair to step back from this sort of very closed, sort of fisted rule and welcome in the board, welcome in the community. Things will go better, they'll be more effective, and there'll be more buy-in. All of these, like your organization, all of these issues have to be done in a government-to-government partnership with community-based organizations, with labor and with the business community. And you can't do that if it's all going to be done under one.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that public-private partnership with you. And I think that touches along the lines of people wanting some new ideas, right? Because what we've been doing hasn't really been working. We're not getting the results that we should. And I think a lot of that is going to come with new ideas. Now, you were mayor of Portland from 2009 to 2012. You've been on the Portland City Council. You were chief of staff for former mayor Vera Katz. Some may say you're part of the old guard, if you will. How would you respond to that? And how would you bring some new ideas to your position?
Well, accepting the premise of old guard for just a second, I'm old guard in the city, not the county. So that's one thing. Worst case scenario from a pure change agent sort of point of view. The other thing, look what I've done with my time in the city. I don't think anyone would reasonably accuse me of guarding the status quo or, not asking the tough questions, not bringing folks in much smarter than myself to conceptualize, what's the issue? Not only what's the problem, but what's the untapped opportunity. And it's partly why I'm a controversial issue, controversial politician. I don't I chose a life of public service coming from a hardscrabble family. So I've seen how government can help and how government makes it unnecessarily difficult for people, especially going through tough times, which my family did. Unnecessarily difficult for people to get a little bit of help to get themselves sort of back on their feet. So that's one thing. The second thing, as an outsider to county government, I can help the city and county work better together on those shared sort of systems of responsibility, those shared issues of responsibility. In this case, houselessness, mental health, drug addiction, affordable housing, and on the community safety side, police, jails, it's, courts, DAs, public defenders. Those are all part of the same one system shared by cities and counties and the state and some other agencies. So I bring that sort of bridge building and horse whispering in the county, sort of helping the county understand sort of how, in a granular level to the big policy level, how the city really functions. And look what I guess the other thing I would say is, look at my campaign. I get hives when candidates only talk about what needs to happen, not how to make their ideas happen. And my campaign is not only the what, but the how. So in terms of homelessness, this year between Home Forward, just the city of Portland and Multnomah County, when you look at spending on houselessness, mental illness, drug addiction, and a little bit on affordable housing, it's $700 million. Between those three organizations, $700 million. If you take the highest estimate of homeless folks right now, both living inside and outside, that's around, let's say 12,000 people. You take $700 million and not all of that goes to houseless, but you take $700 million and you can make that go quite a long ways for 11, 12,000 people. So if I'm good at anything, it's master of the obvious. I'll be promoting that $700 goes on the table, and there is a houseless continuum, which is sort of the theory of change and success in houselessness. And then you've got all this sort of wasteful spending and a patchwork between different, organizations, different governments. They need to be sitting around the table, both the folks on the ground, the proverbial, director of behavioral health, and I would give them 90 days to come up with a actual system out of this hodgepodge and to come up with a plan. 90 days, it'll be rough, but a whole lot more actionable, and it will be act and plan. And we would, if I have my way, treat this like let's say homelessness, the humanitarian disaster that it is, and find savings in what are now wasteful siloed programs and help the next sort of rung of people, the next sort of concentric circle of people out there, like the working poor. That right now we are so wasteful on the money we're spending on what we call single adults. It's so wasteful, the amount of money, that because it's being budgeted in sort of this siloed hodgepodge way. And, we have 8,000 families on the waiting list that are homeless. We've got to find, we will find, and it isn't just about savings as well. It's about some programs are going to be more effective than others. The ones that aren't effective and have not been effective and cannot change, they get cut. We'll invest in what worked. And we'll balance the resources so it isn't just all going to single adults. And part of that is joint budgeting. The other part of this is there are 4, the auditor for the county had audit results that said that folks experiencing houselessness have to participate in 4 different sort of intake care systems, or 4 different sort of systems to get the resources that they need. If you've been outside for any, just months, you're going to be pretty exhausted. We need one sort of care system, one care-based system, so that all the providers and all the ERs to the county health clinics, the folks that are taking care of the social services and permanent housing, within bounds of confidentiality, we're smarter than the drug. We're smarter than fentanyl. We're smarter than the addiction. And then, we need, I found over the years for myself and others, these sort of virtuous benefits of tracking and disclosure, and so for this $700 million, in my mind, there's a report card. Where is all the money going? What are we getting for it? And that gets mailed out to every business and every household in the city. The first year will be rough, I'm quite sure. But again, act and plan as we go, learn and iterate is acting like, in response to this emergency that we actually are facing that is dragging down everything else we're trying to do as a city.
Yeah, so Sam, you touched on a lot of great points that I definitely wanted to dive a little deeper into. And one of them was the amount of wasteful spending that we've had. The Joint Office of Homeless Services spent $1 billion with a B over the past 5 years on homelessness. It seems like the problem's only gotten worse. So how well do you think that money's been spent? How would you change that going forward? Almost more importantly to a lot of minds is, how could we improve the coordination between the city and county services to address this more effectively?
Great questions. It's an oversimplification to say follow the money and track it, but it still is a wise one. The problem with the joint office, it has a fatal flaw. It doesn't even have coordination authority within county. Up until just a few months ago, it only had one of a half dozen cities as a partner, and that was the city of Portland. The rest of the cities were never invited to the table. And it relies on outside advisors, and there's a really important role for outside advisors from business, from community-based organization, from contractors for the county. That's really important. But if you don't have the people represented, the people that are in charge of the work around the table, like the department heads and the sub-department heads and the people that put together the budget every year, that's sent to the chair, that then is sent to the board. And that budget is, like we said, siloed across departments within the county, siloed again across jurisdictions like Home Forward. So that's why, again, I master the obvious. That's why it's got to go on one place and be tracked, spent and tracked. Weekly meetings, we'll figure it out. A lot of it has been figured out, but not all of it. And it hasn't been looked at in terms of waste between the silos. And again, it isn't just about waste. It's about what works the best. It's about, is this the most essential thing we could be doing right now? Is it activity or is it activity Z? And like I said, 8,000 families with children on the waiting list that are homeless. And we've got to find more efficiencies in that $700 million. And it's, with the exception of affordable housing, which is a different matter, it seems like we've got enough right now. It's not just a question of money. It seems like we've got enough right now to make a dent. And again, we need to make up for the fact that the county, they did increase shelters in the past 10 years, but they didn't increase them enough. And they're offering a product or a service, these shelters that are these big congregate shelters, was just a bureaucratic word for lots of cots in big rooms. And people don't want to go there. And, we can cajole them, force them, in different ways, persuade them to go there. But when I was back at the city for 2 years, and I would spend time in homeless camps every week talking to folks, and as we improved our offer of offering them a ride, free storage, we'll help them pack up their stuff. They get to choose among which shelter they wanted to go to. We drove them there. We helped them get checked in. None of that, which was about 1 person in 10 maybe made it to shelter on their own if they had a phone and somehow packed up their stuff and hid it somewhere and got to the shelter. 1 in 10 to about 4 in 10. And when I would ask, with that kind of service, when I'd ask why you're not saying yes, it's like, we would like someplace outside that's safe, that has basic facilities, and we could basically. And that's how the onus, that was the thinking behind Dan Ryan's Safe Rest Villages. And then my team's contribution was the larger task sites that are the larger shelters. And this addressed another part of this where the city and the county I can help sync up is when I got back to City Hall in February 2021, there were 800 camps across 146 square miles. That is the city of Portland, ever moving. There is no way the county or the city would ever have enough money to pay for enough outreach workers in these ever moving camps to create any kind of bond of familiarity or trust for them to even think about the offer being made to come in off the street. So that's why I support a phased-in ban, because it's a public health approach. I had a citywide ban, and that's what the city council passed, along with these larger, now called temporary alternative shelter sites. We're not the best marketers or branders in the city, the task sites.
What's your view on the public-private partnership specifically for homelessness? Recently, Bybee Lakes had just finally received some county funds. They're doing a great job, have a wonderful track record, and have shown statistically how they're helping improve. And the county made them go through a whole bunch of hoops, which ironically, they don't make other public entities go through to get the funding. So what's your view on the public-private? And there's also the religious aspect, right? Leveraging maybe some deflection programs that have religious requirements. What's your view on that? And do you think there's more collaboration between public and private entities?
I think the public, private, nonprofit, which are closely tied, along with community-based organizations, that partnership is absolutely essential to making real headway on the issue of homelessness and mental illness and drug addiction. Absolutely essential. Before I got back to City Hall in February 21, I was reading the coverage of Bybee Lakes and just sort of scratching my head like, what, Bybee Lakes is not a no barrier shelter. And there's a place for that in the scheme of all shelters. And among low barrier shelters, it was producing amazing results. And yet the county was just like, absolutely, as you described in your question, just like so and cynical. So when I got back in February 21, I reached out to Alan, Bybee Lakes, got a tour, asked to see the books and the numbers. I was impressed with how frugal and effective they were, and recommended to the mayor that the city give them $1 million because we had a little bit of extra money. And so I think the city, and we got that through council, and I believe, so we were the first local government to give resources on a one-time basis to help Alan and his great team at Bybee Lakes. But it illustrates the sort of this ideology, sort of ideological sort of bent that isn't evidence-based, or if it is, we're certainly not let in on sort of the secret of the evaluation. And that's got to stop. If it's a matter of playing favorites or the optics of something, put it out on the table. Be upfront enough that if it was really because it was too far away from sort of residential or what have you, then be upfront about that. And there are ways it ended up being its own community. And there were advantages and a few disadvantages, but I think mostly advantage from having a certain amount of separateness where people could really focus on sort of themselves in a learning and recovery environment. But if you're going to take such an extreme measure, like I personally feel the chair did and others on the county board did, to just sort of, blank out Bybee Lakes, then at least have the timidity to put your opinions out there, because he felt gaslighted. He was like, what have I done wrong?
Right. And that goes to a lot of different things. And you were talking about maybe some low barrier options. Well, I'm also curious about the prospect of a sobering center. Portland's last sobering center was closed in 2020 because staff couldn't handle the increase in aggressive behavior, possibly understaffed. Since then, first responders have had very few options in terms of where to take intoxicated persons. Current Chair Jessica Vega Peterson says that we will have a sobering center in 2025. 15 initial beds is what they're saying. What is the status on that? Is it enough? And how do we stop a repeat of the incidents that caused the last closure?
The sobering center is absolutely key, a missing piece of the sort of puzzle to help address just this epidemic of illegal drug use and overdoses and everything awful that goes with it. So the sobering center is absolutely key, and it should be done, in my mind and in others, it should be done sort of in a coordinated and parallel track as the deflection center. Those are two new programs. They're related or should be related. And to develop them, one and then start the other doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any logical sense to me. They should be designed in a coordinated way. And even if a sobering center, is put up smaller on a temporary basis to sort of get its sea legs a little bit as you then make it larger, I think that needs to be part of the vision as well, not just 15 beds who, check mark, we're done. Not even close. So it's just another example, my observation of too often the top decision making at the county lacks that focus, that urgency, good partnership and accountability. These two programs, these two projects, the deflection center and the sobering center, the poster childs for that, I think, accurate observation on my part and others. And I just want to highlight the circles of responsibility around homelessness that are shared and public safety that overlaps the two circles, the Venn diagram, the inadequate partnershiping with the cities and other partners on this issue, including the private sector and nonprofit community. One of the biggest surprises I've had in this campaign is the amount of shared concern that the county contractors have over how the county manages itself and manages them. I just assumed from afar that they were pretty happy with the way things were. And I would say they're much unhappier than I ever imagined. There's a core of very large contractors providing social services and then a lot of other smaller ones. And the county's trying to grow a diversity of more larger contractors, and that makes some sense to me. But they struggle with the lack of definition in the contracts of what should be their success as the county's partner. So I think there's some untapped expertise to bring to the table around these issues like the sobering center and the deflection center. But I go to that $700 million. The more savings we can get out of that, the more that we prioritize what is truly, what's the baseline operations and prioritize above that, where do we want to put the money above the baseline? It's got to be in more treatment. If we think the federal government or the state government are going to ride to our rescue anytime soon, which is what basically we've been doing in recent years, that's foolhardy. We have to make sure that we're spending this ample amount of money, $700 million, in the right way on the right thing at the right time.
Shifting gears just a little bit, but close second to the homelessness problem is crime.
Yeah.
What we've been seeing has been a rise in crime rates in Portland, specifically post-pandemic, right? Especially in the northeast, going out to Gresham, part of the city and county. You, with Mayor Ted Wheeler, worked on addressing gun violence. What were some of the challenges that you faced in working with the county, and will you, as your position as a commissioner, be able to help influence what's happening in terms of gun violence?
Yeah, so the untapped opportunities to address gun violence are around even more and closer cooperation than my team and I, along with the mayor, were able to achieve over the last, and then after I left, over the last 3 years. For example, I'm taking a holistic approach to stopping gun violence. It requires a robust partnership with the county around parole and probation. and they're significantly understaffed. Their caseload is sky high. The state is supposed to help them to a degree with those resources, but whether the state comes to the rescue or not, we should be steely-eyed focused. Are we doing our best with the resources that we have? And the amount of money going into community safety is also very large. And so I would take a similar approach, money on the table. And I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about consolidation. I'm not talking about all of that, logistical and legal nightmare. I'm talking about joint efforts, voluntary joint efforts. The county has to want to do it. I know the city wants to do it on both this homelessness issues, human wellness issues, and also the community safety and crime issues. And just waiting for some sort of proverbial white knight from somewhere to show up when the public feels like they're already being taxed enough. And where are some results, or at least where's some accounting? That's what I'm leaning into, because it's in front of us. We have the resources in front of us. These two and a couple of other organizations can own a heck of a lot to this issue. We bring partners to the table, like the private sector, community partners, other partners, and treat it as well like the community emergency that it is. Get it up, act and plan, and just be, really insistent and disciplined on scaling up what works. It's always changing. We didn't have fentanyl like we do now in terms of impact, 3 years ago. So you're always looking for changing environment. And we need this sort of intergovernmental places where we're actively managing these shared systems. And that's the approach that I'm taking.
Yeah, and I think going back to livability being a concern in this city, that's been an issue for a lot of residents. The accountability for police, I know you've worked on that in this past in your time as mayor and so forth. Chief Bob Day is now there. He's working to reform. It feels like what I've heard from Vadim Mazursky, who I just recently interviewed, that they're understaffed, probably not being properly funded enough, or not having the resources that they need. How can you, as a county commissioner, help influence how we're helping advocate for police safety, for crime reduction, and those sorts of things?
Well, first, as a candidate, unlike my opponent, Shannon Singleton, as part of my campaign platform is I've called for more funding for police. I've called for more funding for DA, for public defenders. And again, my commitment to go into the existing $4 billion county budget to not only find savings, but to reprioritize where necessary. I'm committed, not just committed to doing, but I've done it as an executive of a $6 billion municipal corporation in the city of Portland, and helped other mayors do it as well. So this is a commitment I can make that I have experience in following through on. My job will be to convince others to go along. And to your specific point with the city, I've been the police commission, and the city shared programs and bureaus at the city need to go through the same scrutiny that I'm talking about together with the county. And, if there are opportunities to find savings in one place and not another, but at a minimum, even with the, let's say, inadequate amount of money, and I'm committed to finding more, to not make it worse by pretending there won't be bottlenecks. So we just saw that recently when the sheriff said, I'm not going to be booking people arrested under the city's law, time, place, and manner for being houseless and not accepting a shelter bed. That kind of thing we need to know. I imagine, because the jail right now is already matrixing out some pretty dangerous people. And if someone comes in on that city ordinance that's dangerous enough, they might stay. I don't know. I'm just guessing from the outside based on my experience, but those conversations can happen in a more thoughtful way and a more honest way. That debate, whatever the debate needs to happen between the sheriff and the mayor, it needs to happen. And there needs to be a place for that. And if it's a matter of resources right now, depending on how you count it, 30 to 40% of the jail is not open. And again, I'm committed to going into the $4 billion budget and finding resources to get it open. My opponent is not. My opponent has said flat out, no. My opponent, sued the city for time, place, and manner, which would, if she had succeeded along with others, you could have a camp on the sidewalk and parking strip in front of your house. And the city's ability to move that would be much diminished without time, place, and manner. So there's back to why you have me on this program. There's real choices in this race. And there are real choices in Vadim's race as well. And the vote matters. In my case, and I think in Vadim's case as well, we bring an expertise to the table that I think in this place and time is really important to have on the county.
You mentioned in terms of people struggling, and COVID really changed downtown Portland to the negative in a lot of ways, which kind of invited this negative entity downtown. COVID kept people working from home, right? So there weren't as many people going to downtown, to the core CBD. And that has been this snowball effect, if you will, right? Drug, crime, homelessness kind of came in to replace what used to be workers going to the downtown area. How do you think we can revitalize that area, particularly in terms of helping small businesses and attracting new investments to the downtown CBD?
I think it is right now, based on what I know, and I always feel like I've got a lot to learn on these kinds of issues, but right now get as much housing downtown as possible. And conversions on our particular building set, I have been told, are difficult in terms of converting to housing. But where there is vacant land, upzone it and have as much housing as you can. And there are parking lots all over downtown. My former boss, Mayor Vera Katz, had a strategy for capping I-405, which would bring in, I forget how many, hundreds of acres. So there are things that can be done. In the near term, though, while people figure out and employers figure out how many people are going to be coming back to the office, one thing we know is with every single parking lot downtown, this is more of a city thing, but I am championing this as a candidate for county commission, which relies on more housing to be successful in, cleaning up the streets. But I think all types of housing. My experience at this is I was one of the folks on behalf of Mayor Vera Katz that negotiated the Pearl District River District agreement that has built tens of thousands of housing units, many of them deeply, deeply affordable. Right now, we need that kind of housing boost so that people are downtown, more people are downtown, and to the extent it can focus on conversion, great. There's plenty of land downtown, and if the city needs to be reaching out and working with those owners, and we need to fix our reputation because right now, we've got investors, most of which are out of the city, fund projects in cities all over the United States. And we need back to your original topic. We need to deal with this homelessness issue and our public safety problem before we're going to get the kind of investment. And it's always public-private partnerships, especially around affordable housing. There isn't enough tax dollars to subsidize our way out of this. We have to attract investment from here, but a lot of it are from people in Chicago and New York City and Los Angeles. So it all sort of works together. But as much housing we can get downtown as quickly as possible, the better.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the housing issue, especially in the public-private partnerships, because a lot of us, because we're in commercial real estate, a lot of us have felt that the public side of things, so the government and the bureaucracies, have really pushed out sort of the private sector in terms of housing creation. How do you think that can be reversed?
I've been, because I've been party to so many neighborhood and housing developments, public-private partnership agreements over the years, I feel like I can speak in an informed manner. We have to attract, if we're going to build 20,000 units of housing, which would make up half the gap in, the next 10 years, we might be able to bring to the table maybe a couple of billion, including with tax and local tax incentives. We're going to have to attract, and this is a blue sky number, but to give a sense of what others have talked about, we're going to have to attract $13 billion in private funding. So we have to be an attractive place for investment. We're competing against Boise and Salt Lake and, Seattle and the Bay Areas and Sacramento. And so we need to embrace the fact, even if you don't like, housing developers, but you want to see more affordable housing, we have to get real about it. And there are plenty of great developers locally funded with outside resources that can make sure that it's done in a quality way. It happens over and over. And I know many of them by name. But we have to embrace the fact that we have to attract billions of dollars competing against other cities that are also competing against us for those investments in housing that can go anywhere in the United States.